This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome back, everybody.
Afternoon.
Yeah, so I think last we left it, we were hoping Santino was going to be able to join the discussion and provide his second round of rankings. So thank you, Santino, for making time this afternoon. So what we did was take your guys' updated scores and enter them into this spreadsheet. We also added a row based on the total score of coming up with the rank for each of the proposals as well. The three we were discussing earlier this morning that were on the top are still, fall out under that ranking scheme as well. So now we have a point of comparison of both the total scores based on the reviewers' input as well as the three standard um, uh, uh, rank scores that we provide as an SRE program in consideration as that we provide as an SRE program, and then we also put the total rank on there as well for consideration of this discussion.
Did y'all follow what Ed just said?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just came in. I caught the very tail end of that. What is the total rank?
That's based on the total score amongst each reviewer. So it's basically providing a rank based on the total score just for that reviewer.
Okay.
That takes into consideration the SRE program's scores that weren't considered probably for you all as you considered a funding recommendation.
Yeah, is that clear to everybody? Because that wasn't initially to me. So that total score that we're seeing are those elements that we graded as reviewers plus everybody got the spreadsheet with the estuary programs rankings for the other elements of review. I wasn't initially paying attention to that when I was comparing scores. So.
Yes. So you basically, if you look at any one of those columns, C, D, E, F, G, H, or sorry, C, D, E, F, G, it's basically a 1 through 4 ranking based on the scores of that reviewer.
Well, Ed, if you would humor me for a moment and just wanted to let everybody know, I really appreciate the flexibility today. It was not my intent to disrupt your Friday, but I had things to deal with that were unplanned today. And again, appreciate everybody's flexibility and apologize for the late afternoon Friday meeting.
I'll take a cocktail in payment.
You got it. Anytime. Anytime. You name the time and place. I could use one myself, to be honest with you.
I think the last we left the discussion, just to bring you up to speed too, Santino, is we had at the tail end of our meeting this morning a conversation about potentially asking some of the respondents to come back to answer any questions or potentially shortlist from this top 3 tier, and kind of delayed sort of any concurrence on that at this point. I think most of the discussion centered around trying to make a decision today based on the information and the discussion we've already had. But just providing that additional background to you, Santino, because you weren't on the call this morning.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would be fine moving forward today if we've reached a consensus on a winning proposal.
So it looks
And I don't
like
know if
based on
Go ahead. Sorry.
no, that's okay. I'm just trying to read the numbers. So the right column, the H column is the final scores.
That's correct. The averages of all of us.
Yes.
So based just on these scores, it looks like Geosyntec wins out. Is that correct?
The same problem we had before we hung up, which is their funding recommendation is out of whack with their score relative to Stantec.
Yes, you're right. It still is.
The same issue we had before, except it's actually even a little closer because before Tino's came in, I think the Stantec was 78.5. Now it's 80.6. Geosyntec came down a 0.2 or something, it looks like. My memory serves me correct. The funding recommendation actually didn't change, I don't believe. Actually, Stantec went lower in the funding recommendation. It was 1.7 before, I believe.
And low.
Yeah, Jeff, I can just
for the
correct the low.
Yeah.
For the total rank, the lowest number would be the best number. Correct.
But really, I mean, so to me, the way I'm reading this, total rank is the bottom line.
But the total rank is just what we individually ranked based on removing minority, previous work awarded, proposed project costs.
Based
Correct.
on the RFP advertisement, my recommendation from the board would be based on a rank amongst the total scores.
In which case, Geosyntec has the lowest rank.
So I am confused. I thought I understood what you had said about the total rank, but I guess I don't. It doesn't include the funding recommendation?
No, that was your input based on just your review scores that you provided during the preliminary ranking.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. That's what I thought. So how are we supposed to, or how are we supposed to, if we are supposed to reconcile the funding recommendations disparity for Geosyntec versus the total scores in Stantec versus the total scores for Stantec and Geosyntec?
Why we're here today
That's what
having this discussion, and we can go
So-
through as many rounds as you guys want to
You said the total
evaluate
rank
these
was the
proposals.
way it went.
So the request for proposals outlines the evaluation process, and like Ed just mentioned, it stipulates that the review committee can go through as many rounds of scoring as it deems necessary to reach a consensus finding to present to the executive director. We are showing you how your findings will be translated into an executive director's recommendation. That's what the total rank is, sort of Ed showing you the philosophy of the recommendation that would go to the board based on the scores that the estuary program has provided and the scores that you all have provided. So as you all have discussed and identified, we have two proposals that are scoring very similarly, the proposal from Geosyntec and the proposal from Stantec. So it's up to you all to decide if you want to shortlist to 2 out of the 4, and then go through a question and answer period with those proposers. If you want to go through another round of scoring to see if you can reach consensus on the scores that you all provide that will match up with the funding recommendation that's there and ultimately into the ranking that goes before the boards. Or if you're satisfied with the work that you've done so far and this represents a consensus opinion of your findings, then those are sort of like the 3 options as I see them.
So the funding recommendation doesn't have any bearing on this at all.
Well, I think that's sort of you all expressing your consensus. That's the point where you're trying to get to your consensus about what you think is your top ranked firm. And so you can kind of see like the bottom line for each reviewer. I think it's a useful rule of thumb, but ultimately that funding recommendation that you all come up with is supposed to be corresponding to the scores, the total scores.
I have a couple questions on, so I'm focusing now on the blue fields, because those are not fields that the technical review committee considered when, at least I didn't, when I was ranking my,
And that's correct. You
when I,
shouldn't have. Those scores were issued by
yeah.
the estuary program.
Okay, so on what basis is Geosyntech's proposed project costs a 5 and Stantec's a 1? Can you explain that difference to me, just in general terms?
Yeah, it's outlined in the RFP, but it's basically a scale between the lowest cost bid up to what we advertise for the RFP amount. In this case, all 4 bids were below what we advertise. So it's a range based on up to 25% of the um, lowest bid receives a 4, the lowest bid receives a 5, up to 25%, close to that range of values of respondents receives a 4, 50 to 75% receives a 3, and um, uh, between 75 and 100% is, I believe, a 2. And I could be getting those values wrong. Can you bring that up, Maya?
Well, Ed, while you're doing that, I'll just make a comment on that. So when you look at the budgets for each, I think they were all within about $3,000 or $4,000 of each other. Is that correct? I mean, I can pull the
Correct.
spreadsheet up and okay.
Correct.
That is correct, but those 2 bids represent the full spread of the highest and the lowest.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying that there's a lot of weight put into the forced ranking of the proposal costs, and certainly that's relevant when there's a huge spread. But in this case, I mean, should there be that much emphasis and weighting put on the project costs when all 4 bidders were within, I don't know what that equates to percentage wise,
Those
less than 1%.
criteria were advertised and are not something that we can deviate from in the review. So those are
Okay.
firm.
Okay, I'm just bringing that up. Say that again,
Pardon?
Jeff.
Maya, I don't know if you could share page 5 of the RFP, and that kind of outlines the breakdown for the cost of the bids.
I'm working on it right now.
No, that's fine. Well, I get it. You can't change those. That's just a serious penalty for a $4,000 range between all for all of them.
It's 5
I
points
think
out
the
of a
question
total.
is,
Yeah, scroll down a little bit more.
I was just going to say, not a single one of us recommended Geosyntech for the number 1 recommendation.
That's the way I'm
Not a
reading it.
single one. I don't know. If I have to change my Stantec ratings to better reflect the rest of the group, I'm willing to do that. We didn't look at applied, but I'm assuming we're not looking at them because they're not even close. Because I don't think anybody but me picked them. So.
Well, I know one thing. I don't want Kevin grading my papers. I can tell you that.
He is already, isn't he?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Too late. Good point. That's funny.
Yeah, I think Jeff, applied ecology does not score as close to the other 2.
I know I'm a little out of whack on that one. I'm pretty close. I'm just an engineer. Y'all just have to have some pity on me. Don't understand all this biology stuff. Give me flows and channels and tidal flux. I'm all in.
Well, I don't know if this adds to the discussion, but I'll give you guys a little bit of perspective, and I apologize, but I think with the exception of me, I think everybody on the technical review side that's been asked to participate is public sector. So I can just give you a little insight into, like our business process. I have obviously, bid rules and policies that I have to follow in terms of obtaining bids for work. I also have guidelines that I have to follow, but I think that's an important word. They're guidelines. And I am allowed to deviate in terms of cost under certain circumstances. And I think this would be an example in the private sector where even though we may have a set of guidelines around these same exact categories, prior work experience, we certainly want to engage with minority and disadvantaged and women-owned businesses, and we do that. But when you get to cost is something that does not drive our decision 100% of the time. So the thing I'm a little taken aback by is that exactly what Jeff said. It looks like the consensus from a technical review and of the proposed approach to the problem we're trying to solve is that the Stantec proposal would better meet our needs. But because we have this forced ranking system, we are being steered and choosing a different winning bid potentially. And I think I don't know if we're constrained just because that's what the advertised process was, but that's a little tough to swallow.
That's a great.
Go ahead. Sorry, Chris.
No, I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say that's a great way to put it. And, I can tell you from the Water Management District's perspective, when we do RFPs, cost is not factored into that. It does if it's an RFP, if it's a bid for construction, for example, yes, cost does factor into that. But when we do RFPs, requests for proposals, we don't put cost as a criteria. So I do see your point, and I think in this particular case, you do point out that, and correctly so, from a technical standpoint, Stantec has a slight advantage. So I think the question ultimately is going to be back to you, Ed and Maya. It sounds like just from a technical standpoint, which is what this committee was asked to review, Stantec has the higher score. But it really ultimately falls on you guys having advertised this RFP. If we are bound by the rules that were laid out in this RFP, then based on what we see on the screen, Geosyntec actually then has the advantage because of the cost difference. So I don't know if I feel comfortable changing my technical ranks to fit to get around that, but I don't know what the group thinks.
Yeah, and I appreciate Jeff's suggestion there to do that, to try and thread the needle, so to speak. But I actually feel like that would be something I would question as a bidder. It's to say, oh, you now have gone back, you've seen what the result is, you've gone back and manipulated the result to get the answer you want. So I would not be personally supportive of that idea.
Well, I have a question for the committee, because even in your funding recommendation based on the scores that you provided, you don't have consensus among yourself as reviewers that Stantec is your top ranked firm based on your technical review component. So you have several reviewers that don't line up that way. So I'm not sure that there's consensus on that point either.
Yeah, but all but two of us recommended him the number one for funding recommendation. That's what I'm struggling with. How are we supposed to reconcile that we don't think we like their proposal, they've met the criteria, they did all these things right, but I don't like the approach, because the approach is the same. Technically, I feel like both Geosyntec and Stantec are the same old empirical. I'm not going to be able to tell anybody's load that's impacting the bay. It's just a big bucket that we're ultimately going to say, okay, we need to take 25% off of everybody. We need to take 30% off of everybody, instead of potentially targeting what's going on in Rocky or what's coming out of Lake Tarpon or what's coming in from Feather Sound. No, we're just saying, oh, it's just a big bucket when we do empirical because we can't see anything, y'all. The allocations go down to like 0.1 ton or 0.05 tons. It's like 200 pounds. We're not even close to that. We can't see a ton with any of these two models, in my opinion, unless something's
Jeff,
changed.
are you arguing that we should be considering the third ranked respondent again, or is there
Well,
at least consensus that Geosyntec and Stantec are the top two amongst the scoring criteria and the rankings that we've developed so far?
well, I guess I am, but I am not. That's because that's who I like, because they do what I like, what my business is, which is hydrology, not biology. So, and I think it's a hydraulic problem. I'm sorry, you guys. It's Sesame Street. One of these 4 bay segments is not like the other. 72 hours residents time in Hillsborough Bay. Like probably 24 in middle and lower Tampa Bay. Months above the causeway, months. It's a hydrology thing, guys. I'm sorry. And we're not going to be able to, and we need to cut the loads. I feel that way. I felt that way 20 years ago when Charles asked me to first start looking at this with him. I still feel that way. It's not going to sell well if we're not able to say, you know what, most of this is coming out of Lake Tarpon, or no, most of this is coming out of Rocky Creek. We've been around this long enough to know that. I personally think we were lucky to keep Tampa the last time around, and Clearwater. Now you got to change the leadership in Clearwater. So yeah, I guess I am still arguing for the other, but I'm recognizing that that's probably not a battle I would win, but I still would say going with our existing model, how is it going to tell something different, y'all? It's been telling us for 20 years that this bay segment is okay from a loading
I'm
perspective.
trying to steer the conversation of what is the consensus among the review panel at this point.
Hey, Ed,
It's different than what the total rank recommendation is based on the scoring criteria, then I need to hear that. And if not, I'm going to go with the total rank criteria that we've established based on the total
Ed,
scoring criteria.
Understood.
I wanted to bring something up. So Maya, you mentioned about the funding recommendations. I noticed that 2 of the 5 reviewers, the funding recommendation for Geosyntec and Stantec are the same. The other 3 ranked Stantec as 1, but for 2 of the reviewers, both Geosyntec and Stantec have funding recommendations of 2 and 3 respectively.
There are some inconsistencies for 2 of the reviewers between their technical scores and their funding recommendation. So that's part of why I'm wondering if there needs to be another round of scoring so that folks can make sense of that, or why I'm asking the question of, is there consensus around a top-ranked respondent? Because I know some of you are saying you think that there is, but I'm trying to get everyone to explicitly say, that they have consensus, because to me the scores aren't reflecting that yet.
Can you give a funding recommendation of the same value to 2 proposals? Can I do all 4 as rank them all as 2? Or do they have to be sequential? Is it a rank? I guess it was confusing.
If they were scored identically, then you could give them the same rank. If they are scored differently, they should have a different rank.
Okay, so let's take column E just as an example, just so I'm clear. Column E, you have a total score for Geosyntec of 78, a total score for Stantec of 75. Both have the same funding recommendation of 2. So by your definition, then Geosyntec should have a funding recommendation of 1 because 78 is greater than 75. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I mean, it doesn't really change anything because the 2 inconsistencies would go from 2 and 3 to 1 and 1, or 1 and 2. I don't know who the 1 was, but then you still have the same issue where you've got some ranking Stantec with a funding recommendation of 1, some ranking Geosyntec with the funding recommendation of 1. But it looks like Geosyntec, as it stands right now, did not receive a funding recommendation of 1 at all.
Correct.
Stantec received 3 out of the 5. It was given a 1, which is why it comes out at
But I thought we
1.6.
could modify the funding recommendations reconciliation with the score we gave the proposal if we provided comments on why we did that. So I'm one of those people that don't match up. I'm column F. The reason I said that for both of them is that I don't think an empirical model is going to solve our problem. I think a hydrologic model is going to solve our mechanistic model is going to solve our problem. So I didn't rate them for funding recommendation.
So my read of the scoring criteria is that those relate to the project approach and should be reflected in the project approach scores that you provide.
Well, then I would have lowered my project approach for both Geosyntec and Stantec then, but that's not how I read it.
To me, the conversation that has been had since this morning is all around those scores along the project approach criterion.
That's
I mean, project approach is organization and clarity of proposal, understanding of TBN/MC/RA process, and detailed descriptions of required tasks and methods and analysis.
So if the detailed description and justification of the required tasks does not line up with the methods and analyses that you would like to see, that seems like the score should reflect.
And I did not read it that way. I read it as, did they provide a detailed description of the required tasks, methods, and analysis, which I felt that Geosyntec, Stantec, and Applied did that. And to me, which I like the USF proposal, it just was sort of all over the place and not well organized. It wasn't clear to me. They didn't have an understanding of TBNMC. So I didn't rank them high for this category. But I certainly like the notion that they were going to look at some things we haven't looked at, wind, etc. But that's how I read that. I mean, I might have misread that, but that's what I thought when I looked at it. Do you understand are you organized and clear in what you're proposing? Not about whether or not I liked it, but whether or not you were organized, whether your description and justifications of the required tasks were comprehensive. But if you're now telling me that detail, and maybe I just missed it, if you're telling me detailed description and justification should have been where I looked at them from the perspective of whether I thought their approach was going to help us get to an endpoint that we need, then you're correct. I would have rated both of those much lower. You're on mute, Maya.
That score feeds into the overall project approach score that the reviewers provide.
Say that again, Ed, I'm not following that.
Yes, I think that you ought to consider for that overall project approach score that detailed description and justification of required tasks, the methods and analyses that will be performed to complete the RA addendum. You're not just evaluating whether or not they provided a description, but whether or not you think that the approach that they've described is the appropriate one that will accomplish the overall intent of this request for proposals. And that's how that score should be determined.
Okay.
So it sounds like, are we thinking that maybe we need to take another stab at re-scoring these and maybe talk on Monday?
This is your discretion. I laid out sort of what I saw as the three alternatives. We could also have folks provide another round of scores right now, today, and we could see if we can come to consensus.
So let me ask this a little differently. How many of you feel if you were given 10 minutes of quiet time, you would come back with different scores based on what we've discussed about the criteria? I would not change my scores.
I don't think I would change them either. I'm with you.
Kevin?
No, I just need the clarification of from Maya that in the funding recommendation, there's 1 through 5, and we have 4 proposals. Can there be 2? Should it be 1, 2, 3, 4, and there is, or it really is a 5 if you really truly said do not recommend? But we're in the group where we have Geosyntec and Stantec as a 2 for both of those for the funding recommendation. Should it be a 1, 2, 3, or 4? You cannot, it has to be a true rank then, or a 5. Yeah.
As of the non-PhD in the room, that's how I looked at it, Kevin. I said, I just took we've got 4 bids, 1, 2, 3, 4, based on my score for the categories I was asked to evaluate.
Okay. Yeah.
I did not duplicate. Yeah.
And because if that is that, I guess that was, I think that Spinner's question was that a funding recommendation plus total score had combined math into it. But because I agree that it's the project approach that really basically what it boiled down to us, and comparison of scores is like, we understand that the Geosyntec has the understanding of the RA process. There's no question about that. So it ranked higher. The detailed task, we thought it was just outlined better, but then Stantec, in that the arguments for the paradigm is kind of enlightening. It's new and it's a different idea set, and so that ranked higher. And then it came down to the organization of proposals. We just thought that the Stantec one was just better in that regard with the content laid out. So I don't think we would change our scores either, but if it's complicating things, and throwing everything off, we don't want to be the holdup.
Yeah, Kevin, I would just kind of piggyback on that and say I don't think we would change our technical scores, but we could potentially change our ranking, our funding recommendation ranking based on those scores.
Well, I don't think the funding recommendation means anything. Ed's just looking for that column H hit number.
Yeah. So my take on it was
that none of us recommended Geosyntec for funding. Not one of us, but they got the highest rank.
Yeah, it's the problem of a strongly recommended. That is not that's where I think we interpret it as, the recommendation is there at the same level, but it's the details of the components that went into it that are weighted differently. And it's a 2-part test in a sense.
Yeah, when I make a recommendation to the board, I'm taking into account all 7 of the scoring criteria.
but not the recommendation, funding recommendation.
Not the funding recommendation. That's a point of discussion that usually starts these sort of rounds of scoring and making sure that the consensus comes out of these discussions.
Not the funding recommendation. Okay, then that's not the factor then. So,
Yeah, the funding recommendation only shows us that there's some disparity, in theory, in the way we rank them.
mhm.
To me, the funding recommendation is you liked Stantec's approach better than you liked Geosyntec's approach. I didn't, but because mine are the same. My funding recommendations for both of those are the same. I gave them both a 3.
But it was not scored so strongly that it overcame the differences in price, basically.
Yeah, which is interesting because the level of effort and cost by task, which we did rank, Stantec had a higher score.
Yeah.
So their level of effort relative to their cost by task is higher, is a better score for Stantec, yet they ranked really low when it came to the overall cost of the project. That's just the way this RFP was structured. I don't think we can. I mean, that's it. That's how those were the rules, and so it shakes out the way it shakes out with Geosyntec having a ever so slight advantage. And yes, the overall project cost is what tipped the balance to them. But that's it. I don't see how. I mean, it almost seems like we're trying to talk ourselves out of it. But these were the conditions that were laid out in the RFP, and this is the result. So
Well, this is us trying to communicate transparently. So, like, one, if the findings of this committee are distinct from what the director's recommendation are going to be to the board, we're trying to show you that that disparity is there right now. So, like I said, I still haven't really heard express consensus from everyone that Stantec was folks' #1 firm, but I've heard that said by some of you. So if you say that it is, we're showing you that the recommendation that's going to go to the board is not going to match with what the findings of this committee are. And if you all are okay with that based on the rules that were laid out in the request for proposals, then we go on. You've provided your findings. We thank you for your time and review. And this is how it's going to get rolled up. If you're not comfortable with that, then we have the opportunity. We have 2 alternatives. One is to go through additional scoring, which I'm hearing from some of you that you don't think that that's necessary or appropriate. Or 2, we only shortlist to 2 firms, and then we go through a Q&A period or presentation period, and then have subsequent discussion and finalize findings from this committee after that occurs. Those are the paths that I see. They're still the same. Y'all haven't narrowed it down for me yet.
Okay, that's a good. I'm glad you put it that way, Maya. That makes sense. So I think the committee needs to take a vote individually. Who, if you had to choose based on your recommendation, forget the scores, based on technical merit alone, which one would you choose? I think for me, my vote would be Stantec based on the technical part of the proposal alone. I would, and my scores bear that out. Stantec came out higher for me just based on the technical approach than Geosyntec. So that would be my vote.
I would also vote for Stantec, and that's reflected in my scoring.
Same for me as well.
I would vote for Stantec, but it is not reflected because of my project approach score, my detailed description of required tasks and methods analysis scores for both of them.
And that is the same for me, the Stantec, but actually by the total scores and product score, it's higher for Geosyntec. Actually, product score is higher for Stantec, but we're kind of in the same boat as Jeff did.
So I've heard consensus from the review committee that Stantec is your top ranked respondent. So given that, when you take into account the scores that are applied based on the criteria that are in the RFP, what we're showing you is that Geosyntec will come out as the recommendation to the board because of that difference in price. So 2 of you have indicated that your scores aren't reflecting your top priority. Do you want to do another round of scoring, or do you want to have a subsequent Q&A session, or are you comfortable with how your technical review comes out at the end once it's combined with the total, the overall score that's with the addition of the things that are scored by the Tampa Bay Asteroid Program uniformly? Because right now the findings from this committee are not matching with what the recommendation will be to the boards.
I'm open to a presentation, or Q&A. I think there could be merit in doing that.
And Maya, this
Goes
is going to
back.
drive you nuts, but I take a different position on this. I think, again, we've been asked to do a technical review. We've done our job. We've given you our scores. There was an advertised and agreed upon process that all parties involved have kind of are committed to at this point. And I don't think it's actually a horrible thing if the technical review team comes up with a consensus that differs from the official path forward by the program, because there are other factors that are being considered. We may not agree with those. I think in this particular case, for the record, that a couple of $1,000s here or there is probably not, something I would personally or in my professional life put that much emphasis on. But those are the rules as this RFP was presented to the bidders. And I think if we say, well, we're going to do something different, or we're going to have another meeting and rescore, I think that's, if I was on the other end of it, I would feel a little bit like that's moving the goalpost to kind of get the result that you want, rather than the result that is in conformance with the process that you advertised. So
No,
anyway, that's kind of where my mind is.
I don't hate that at all, Santino. I think that's fine. We're just trying to communicate clearly with the committee so that you all know what the outcome will be. And to me, 2 of you have still said that your scores don't reflect your recommendation. And so as long as you're okay with all of that, we don't, it's at the desire of the committee if you want to score again, or if you're all happy with where you are and what the result that we've laid out is going to be. That's great. And we've heard you, and I think we will do our best to communicate as true as we can to the boards the findings from this committee, how that got synthesized into a final score that gets rolled up into an ultimate recommendation for them in their consideration. And so again, that decision is one that's ultimately our management and policy board. The policy board will make that call, and we will present these findings to them faithfully all along the way. We'll walk them through that whole process.
So if Ben and I, as a joint team here, are of that group, it's fine if they don't match up, to move forward.
I like that approach, Maya. I mean, I think that's the only approach that we have available to us. And if you convey to your board that, based on technical merit, Stantec won out, but based on the overall rules of the game, Geosyntec won out, I'm okay with that. I mean, that's the way it is. So I think that's really the only way forward.
Yeah, as Maya mentioned, I think we will try to make that as transparent as possible at both the management and policy board meeting.
Yep, agreed.
Well, if that is closure for everyone, I think I have the information that I need to communicate to our boards. And I really do appreciate y'all taking the time to review and to provide your thoughtful comments and scores along the way. I know this isn't easy, but we do rely on each and every one of your expertise to get this work done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maya. Thanks for refereeing.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
Maya, Lucas.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right.
Later.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.